Hello and thank you so much for joining me on WOW's YouTube channel. My name is Sasha Reade and I am a YouTuber and a crafter, and I have a fun technique today for you using translucent embossing powders. I don't know if you've ever looked at your embossing powders and noticed there might be a T next to it, or an O, or an OM. Those are all little symbols of what is in your embossing powder and how it will look when you use it. So if you have a T, that's translucent, so see-through. If you have an O, that's opaque and obviously not see-through. And we're going to play with translucent powders today and create some really cool looking cards and some beautiful backgrounds. For my cards today, I'm going to use a little panel to go on top of my card. I do trim this down a little bit more so I can fit a matting layer behind the top panel, but I've got a standard card size base in A6 and I've got a little panel here to go on the top. Now for the first technique I'm going to show you, we're going to use this nice large background stamp and we are going to stamp it in black. Now I like the way the black looks. You could stamp it in a different color if that's what you've got, but this Onyx Black ink from VersaFine Clair is a pigment ink, so it will stay wet for a while, and I like to use that and then add my clear embossing powder over it. I find that if I end up using black embossing powder and a little bit sticks somewhere, then it's really noticeable, whereas if you use clear embossing powder you can't see any errors or mistakes anywhere. So I like to stamp in black and then heat emboss with clear embossing powder to get the kind of black look in the background. So I'm going to go ahead and heat set that in the background. And the reason I'm doing clear embossing over the top is because I want to take my embossing pad and put it direct to the cardstock, and that will keep any ink transfer from happening. So I won't end up with that black ink in my clear ink pad. For both my techniques today, I am doing a spotlight technique. So we're going to kind of highlight one section of the card and add the color to that. So for anyone who does not have any kind of dies, or you don't have any masking paper, you can go ahead and use post-it notes for this process, or you can use any kind of low-tack adhesive tape. So this is low-tack tape called Mint Tape from scrapbook.com, and it is essentially the post-it note tape. It's all sticky on that whole entire reel of tape. So I've gone ahead and stuck it around the edge of my card, and I've lined it up with the edge of my card so I don't have to think too much and get that perfect edge around it. I know it will be perfect because my tape is even and I've gone right around that edge. Once that tape is down, I am going to go ahead and ink up the center of it. I'm just going to take my ink pad, squish it right down on top and get it nice and juicy with that clear embossing ink. I've got this little tiny spoon here, which a friend gave me. Really handy dandy, but any spoon will do. You could even just tip it a little bit out the jar, and all we're going to do is add and sprinkle some of our translucent embossing powder onto our background. For the first technique, we are going for a nice little random look, and I'm using very little embossing powder here. All my jars have more than 3/4 left in them, and I have done about 10 of these cards. So it looks like I'm wasting embossing powder, but I am literally just sprinkling the lightest amount on it, and I will save and use that embossing powder. So if you don't tip that embossing powder to the side, you'll see what can happen in a minute. I'll show you what you can do with it. When all that embossing powder is on and you've kind of tapped off the excess, you can go ahead and heat set it with your heat tool and then pull off your outside layer, and you've got your beautiful sort of spotlight image in the middle of your card. So you've got a nice little random bunch of colors. I kind of went for rainbow colors here. And here's the embossing powder that I had left over. I inked up my card panel with a bunch of ink, again direct from the stamp pad onto my cardstock. I squished it down into that embossing powder, and then I heat set it with my heat tool. So you can get a really beautiful background that you can then use for die cutting elements out of. So I can die cut some flowers out of it, do something like that. I just wanted to share with you that you don't have to waste it all. Now for this second version of the spotlight translucent technique, I'm going to use some dies to kind of have a different focal point on my card. And for this, I'm going to use some Gina K Masking Magic paper because it is a nice big full sheet of masking paper. It's really nice for die cutting out of. It's also very reusable, so I can do about 6-7 cards per sheet of masking paper. It really does last a long time and it's really quite useful. So I've got a panel here that I've cut to be the exact same size as my card front panel so that I don't get any embossing powder where I don't want it to go. Now when you've got your shape picked out, you just need to decide where you want it to go on your front of your card. So if you're using a single stamp, you might want to do it around that one image that you're stamping down. If you've got a nice big panel like this, a nice big image in the background. Maybe you want to go for the center like I'm doing here. It's completely up to you. I remove half the release sheet paper, line it up on my card, and then pull off the other half so that I can make sure that it's not sticking before I have it ready to be stuck down. And then I'm going to do the exact same thing as before. I'm going to take my embossing pad and I'm going to go direct to paper and I'm going to squish it down. Now for this technique, I am doing a more purposeful placement of my powders. So I'm starting with the lightest color, working my way up to darker colors, and I'm kind of sprinkling them intentionally where the pattern is in the background. So I'm kind of trying to go with the shape of those images in the background. Now obviously it's not perfect because you've not got the exact flowers colored, but you get the gist of it and it still adds a slightly different element to it. So rather than it just being completely random, I'm sprinkling in an intentional pattern and it looks really pretty. But obviously up to you which you prefer the look of, either random on the left or more intentional on the right, completely up to you. Now here's another one that I made using the tape along the edge rather than the circle, and I did the intentional flowers. So you don't have to have the die to be able to do it, it's just whatever you prefer. So I've gone ahead and mounted my cards onto some little panels. I did a holographic card on the right and a black on the left, and then I'm just picking out some sentiments. So I have some sentiments from Pinkfresh Studios, and then some other ones that I stamped out from Lisa Horton Crafts, and then I've backed this one onto a bit of holographic card, and I can pop it up with a bit of foam tape for both the sentiments, and that kind of finishes them off. And you could add some gems on if you wanted. They don't need much because our whole focal point of the card is that pop of color, and it is so beautiful and gorgeous. You really don't need to add a lot more onto these cards to kind of finish them off. So have a look through your stash, see what stamps you've got. You can add on a sentiment on the front, and that's kind of all you need. So here are some others that I made off screen. I've got some other beautiful samples, playing around with colors, playing around with concentration, you know, how much powder I put on. I did a couple layers on one, and I love these flower ones where it's just a single stamp with just the flower covered, and I think they look gorgeous. So I hope you have fun with this technique and give it a go. If you've got some translucent powders, I will link everything down in the description box below for you if you want to check out what I've used. Take care and have a fabulous week. Bye.